My name is Olive, 34 years old, and I'm standing in this Boston courthouse watching my soon-to-be ex-husband Brian smirk at me from across the room. He thinks he's about to take half of everything, including my grandmother's $15 million estate. The envelope in my briefcase feels heavy with truth he doesn't know exists. My grandmother Margaret passed away 6 months ago, leaving me more than money. She left me protection. Brian believes he knows every detail about my finances. He's about to learn otherwise. Before we continue this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. If you've ever witnessed justice served when someone thought they had all the cards, please hit that like button and subscribe. Because what happened next in that courtroom changed everything. 8 years ago, I met Brian at a charity gala at the Four Seasons in Boston. I was 26, working as a junior financial analyst at Harbor Investment Group, making $70,000 a year and feeling pretty good about myself. The ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers, and I remember adjusting my rented designer dress, feeling slightly out of place among Boston's elite. Brian approached me at the silent auction table. He was 32 tall, with perfectly styled dark hair and a Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "You're bidding on the Vineyard Weekend Getaway?" he asked, gesturing to my bid sheet. "I have a house there. Maybe I could show you around sometime without the auction price tag." It was smooth, maybe too smooth, but his smile seemed genuine. Brian worked at Thompson Mitchell and Associates, one of Boston's prestigious law firms. His father was a federal judge, his mother from old Boston money. During our first conversation, he asked thoughtful questions about my work, seemed genuinely interested in my analysis of emerging markets. "Beauty and brains," he said, but somehow it didn't sound condescending coming from him. Our first date was dinner at L'Espalier. Brian ordered wine that cost $300 a bottle without checking the price. "You deserve the finest things," he told me, and I believed him. The weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard started a month later. His family's estate there had 12 bedrooms and a private beach. I met his parents on the 4th visit. His mother looked me up and down and said, "She's lovely, Brian. What firm did you say your father works for, dear?" When I explained my parents were teachers from Michigan, her smile tightened just slightly. But Brian defended me. "Olive earned everything herself," he'd say proudly. "Full scholarship to Boston University, graduated summa cum laude. She's going places." He seemed to admire my ambition, then called it sexy when I stayed late analyzing portfolios, brought me coffee during my weekend work sessions. The proposal came 11 months later at Fenway Park. Brian had rented out a suite and had the scoreboard flash, "Olive, will you marry me?" during the 7th inning stretch. 200 of our friends and his family were there. The ring was a 3-carat cushion-cut diamond that caught every light in the stadium. I said yes, while 40,000 people cheered. Our wedding had 400 guests at the Copley Plaza. Brian insisted on the best of everything. "This is our foundation," he said, reviewing bills that made my stomach turn. "We're building an empire together." The word together felt important then. Ice sculptures, a 10-piece band, 7-course dinner. My grandmother Margaret sat at the family table, her shrewd blue eyes taking everything in. "Quite the production," she whispered during the father-daughter dance. "Just remember, sweetheart, the wedding is one day. The marriage is what matters." Our first year was everything I'd dreamed. Sunday brunches at our favorite spot in Back Bay, where Brian would read me interesting cases while I reviewed market reports. Couples game nights with his law partner Mark and his wife Jessica. Brian would brag about my promotions, tell everyone how his wife was killing it in finance. When I became a senior analyst 18 months into our marriage, he threw a surprise party. But something shifted in year 2. The comments started small. "Your cute little job," he'd say when introducing me. "Olive plays with numbers all day." When I corrected him explaining I managed $40 million in assets, he'd laugh. "She takes it so seriously." He'd tell his friends like my career was an amusing hobby. My grandmother noticed before I did. During our weekly tea visits at her Beacon Hill townhouse, she'd study me over her china cup. "How's Brian's practice?" she'd ask carefully. Margaret had built her fortune alongside my grandfather in commercial real estate. She understood ambition and recognized resentment. A man who truly loves you celebrates your success, sweetheart. Remember that. Mark's wife, Jessica, pulled me aside at a firm Christmas party. Brian's been making comments, she said quietly, about how you're trying to show him up. Mark thinks you should know. I dismissed it, then thought Jessica was stirring drama. Brian loved me. He supported me. Didn't he? The truth was, his practice was struggling. Thompson, Mitchell and Associates sounded prestigious, but Brian's client list was thinning. Bigger firms poached his cases, younger lawyers outmaneuvered him. While my salary grew, his billable hours shrank. He never said it directly, but I felt his resentment building like pressure in a sealed container. Year 3 brought my promotion to portfolio manager. My salary doubled overnight to $250,000. I came home with champagne, found Brian in his study surrounded by bills. "Congratulations," he said without looking up. The champagne went undrunk. That night he stayed on his side of our king-sized bed, and I pretended not to notice. His practice continued bleeding clients. Thompson, Mitchell and Associates lost a major corporate account to a competitor, and Brian's name was notably absent from the firm's new partnership announcements. "Politics," he said, but I saw the rejection eating at him. He started staying late at the office, claiming he was preparing for a big case that would change everything. I began covering our expenses without discussing it. The mortgage, the car payments, the country club dues. Brian insisted we needed for networking. "It's temporary," I told myself. "Marriage is about supporting each other through tough times." My grandmother's voice echoed during our teas. "Financial dependence breeds resentment, darling. Even in marriage, especially in marriage." The country club incident happened in August. I arrived early to meet Brian for dinner and overheard him with his golf buddies on the terrace. "Olive's playing career woman," he said, taking a long sip of scotch. "Thinks she's some big shot now. It's adorable, really. She'll settle down when we have kids." They laughed, and I stood frozen behind the French doors. This wasn't the man who celebrated my first promotion. Tom Bradley, another lawyer, clapped Brian's shoulder. "Must be nice, though, having a sugar mama." Brian's face darkened. "I'm still the head of my household," he said coldly. "Don't forget that." Jessica found me crying in the bathroom. "I warned you about his comments," she said gently. "Mark says it's getting worse at the firm. Brian blames everyone else for his failures. Be careful, Olive." My grandmother's 80th birthday party was a small affair at her Beacon Hill home. 30 close friends and family, elegant but intimate. Brian spent the evening checking his phone, barely acknowledging Margaret's stories about building her real estate empire. When she described negotiating her first commercial property deal in 1970, Brian actually yawned. Margaret pulled me into her study after cake. "I've been updating my estate planning," she said, her eyes sharp despite her age. "There are things we need to discuss about proper protection." She handed me a business card for her attorney. "Call him next week, alone." When I asked why, she simply said, "Because I've lived long enough to recognize a wolf in a Brooks Brothers suit." Brian's spending escalated that fall. A new BMW M5, a Rolex Submariner premium golf membership at 3 different clubs. When I saw the credit card statements, my stomach dropped. "We can't afford this," I said, spreading the bills across our marble kitchen counter. "Our money," he corrected sharply. "And I need to maintain appearances for the firm. Image matters in law, not that you'd understand crunching numbers in your little cubicle." I didn't have a cubicle. I had a corner office with a harbor view, but Brian had never visited to know that. The fight escalated. "I supported your career," he said, his voice dripping with false hurt. "Encouraged you, celebrated with you. Now you begrudge me a few nice things." It was gaslighting, pure manipulation, but it worked. I apologized, agreed to the spending, even as our joint savings dwindled. 2 months later, I discovered the secret credit cards. 3 of them $40,000 in debt, all in Brian's name, but using our address. Charges at restaurants I'd never heard of, hotels during his supposed client meetings, jewelry that wasn't for me. When confronted, he had an answer for everything. Client entertainment, he said. The firm will reimburse me. You wouldn't understand how business development works in law. But I understood numbers, and these didn't add up. The hotel charges were always for 2 nights when Brian claimed to be at day meetings. The restaurant bills were consistently for 2 people during his supposed solo working dinners. The jewelry store charges aligned with no birthday or anniversary I could identify. You're paranoid, Brian said when I pressed. This is what success looks like. Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with controlling everything, you'd see I'm building our future. But whose future was he building? The answer would come soon enough, and it would shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage. 6 months ago, my grandmother Margaret fell ill suddenly. A stroke during her morning walk left her partially paralyzed, and the doctors gave us weeks, maybe a month. I immediately took family leave from work, something Brian found incomprehensible. You're risking your career for what? He demanded as I packed a bag to stay at the hospital. She has nurses. She has money for the best care. But Margaret didn't need nurses. She needed family, needed me, and I wasn't going to let her spend her final days surrounded by strangers. Those last weeks were precious and painful. Margaret's mind remained sharp even as her body failed. Between the beeping machines and whispered conversations with doctors, she told me stories I'd never heard. How my grandfather had started with nothing, how they'd built their empire through the Depression, through wars, through economic crashes that destroyed others. We survived because we protected each other, she said one evening, her frail hand gripping mine with surprising strength. But we also protected ourselves. Never give anyone complete power over your life, Olive. Not even someone you love. Especially someone you love. The reading of her will happened 3 weeks after her funeral. Brian suddenly cleared his schedule to attend, sitting beside me in the attorney's mahogany-paneled office, holding my hand in a show of support I hadn't felt in years. When the attorney read the number $15 million, Brian's grip tightened painfully. All to my granddaughter, Olive Marie Sullivan, the attorney continued. Brian's breathing changed, quickened with excitement he couldn't hide. In the car afterward, he was more animated than I'd seen in years. This changes everything, he said, already making plans. I can leave the firm, start my own practice. We can buy that house in Wellesley, join the country club as premium members. We, our money. The phrases that had once meant partnership now felt like ownership claims. I'm not quitting my job, I said quietly. Brian's face darkened. You don't need to work anymore. We have $15 million. We. There it was again. The pressure intensified daily. You're being selfish, Brian argued. I've supported your career all these years. Now it's your turn to support mine. The revisionist history was breathtaking. When had he supported anything but his own ego? Our anniversary dinner should have been a celebration. 20 tables at Mistral, Brian's favorite restaurant. I arrived to find his parents already seated, champagne flowing. We hear congratulations are in order, his mother said, her smile calculating. Finally, some real money in the family. Brian had told them about the inheritance without asking me. His father, the federal judge, raised his glass. To Margaret, may she rest in peace, and to the opportunities her generosity provides. They discussed investment strategies, property purchases, trust funds for future grandchildren, all while I sat silent, invisible, just a vessel for their newfound wealth. The money goes into our joint investment account Monday, Brian announced over dessert, not asking but telling. I've already spoken to wealth managers at State Street. When I said I needed time to think, to grieve, to plan, the table went cold. Time, Brian's mother said. Dear, you don't keep $15 million sitting idle. That's financially irresponsible. The discovery of Brian's affair came 2 weeks later purely by accident. I was reviewing our credit card statements, trying to understand our finances before making any decisions about the inheritance, when I noticed the pattern. Every Thursday, charges at the Mandarin Oriental downtown. Always Thursday, always room service for 2, always champagne. Brian had client meetings on Thursdays. Important depositions, he said. Couldn't be disturbed, he said. My hands shook as I called the hotel, pretending to be Brian's assistant confirming a reservation. "Oh, yes," the concierge said warmly. "Mr. Thompson and Ms. Ashley Chen have their usual suite reserved." Ashley Chen. The name was familiar. Brian's new paralegal, fresh from law school, 25 years old, with long black hair and legs that Brian had mentioned were quite professional when she started 6 months ago. 6 months. Right when Margaret got sick. While I was holding my grandmother's hand, Brian was holding someone else. I drove to the Mandarin that Thursday. Waited in my car until I saw them enter together. Ashley wore a red dress that clung to her curves. Brian's hand possessively on her lower back. They didn't look around, didn't worry about being seen. The arrogance of it, the assumption that I was too stupid or too trusting to notice. I followed them inside, keeping my distance, watched them at the bar. Brian ordered champagne, the same label he'd ordered on our anniversary. Ashley laughed at something he said, her hand on his thigh, intimate and familiar. This wasn't new. This was routine. My phone camera captured everything. Brian feeding her oysters their kiss by the elevator, the way he pressed her against the wall while waiting for the doors to open. Each photo felt like a knife wound, but I needed evidence. Margaret's voice echoed, "Documentation is protection, sweetheart. Always have proof." The confrontation happened that night. Brian came home at 11 cologne, trying to mask another woman's perfume. "How was your deposition?" I asked calmly. "Exhausting," he said, loosening his tie. "These cases drain everything out of you." I set my phone on the counter, swiped to the first photo. Brian's face went white, then red, then somehow purple. "It's not what it looks like." He started the cliché so pathetic I almost laughed. "You've been distant focused on your grandmother. Ashley understands the pressure I'm under." "How long?" I asked. "How long have you been sleeping with her?" Brian tried denial, then anger, then gaslighting. "You're paranoid. You're grieving and not thinking clearly. Ashley is just a colleague. Those photos don't show anything inappropriate." The earring was the final insult. I found it the next morning while making the bed, a delicate gold hoop tangled in our sheets. Not mine. I didn't wear hoops. When I showed Brian, he actually said, "Maybe it's the housekeeper's." We didn't have a housekeeper. "You're insecure about aging," he said, going for the cruelest cut. 34 and no children, your biological clock ticking. You see threats everywhere. Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with your career, so cold and calculating, I wouldn't need to find comfort elsewhere. There it was. The truth wrapped in blame. He wasn't denying it anymore, just justifying it, making it my fault. I looked at this man I'd married, loved, supported, and saw a stranger. Or maybe I was finally seeing who he'd always been, the wolf my grandmother recognized from the start. I filed for divorce the next Monday, serving Brian at his office for maximum impact. The process server walked right into a partners' meeting, handed him the papers in front of everyone. Mark told me later that Brian's face went through every shade of red before he stormed out, leaving clients and partners stunned. That evening, Brian came home raging. "You vindictive bitch," he screamed, throwing the papers across our living room. "After everything I've done for you, I made you who you are. Without me, you'd still be some nobody analyst at a third-tier firm." The delusion was breathtaking. "I'm taking everything," he continued, pacing like a caged animal. "The house, the cars, your portfolio, and especially your grandmother's money. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state. Half of that $15 million is mine by law." "That money was inherited," I said calmly. "Inheritance is separate property." Brian's laugh was ugly. "Not when it's commingled with marital assets. And guess what? I've been documenting every penny you've spent on our lifestyle. My lawyer will argue you already treated it as marital property." Brian hired Sherman and Associates, known for their scorched earth approach to high-asset divorces. David Sherman himself took the case, a shark, who'd famously gotten a tech executive's wife 70% of his startup shares. "Your husband has quite the case," Sherman told my lawyer, Catherine, at the first meeting. a supportive spouse who sacrificed his career advancement for his wife's ambitions. Catherine Winters was my response, a former prosecutor who'd transitioned to family law after watching too many women get railroaded by the system. Brian's claiming he was the primary homemaker, she told me after the meeting, that he handled household management while you pursued your career obsessively. The discovery process was a nightmare. Brian claimed I'd hidden assets, moved money offshore, structured the inheritance to cut him out illegally. His legal team requested 5 years of bank statements, investment records, every email I'd ever sent about money. They wanted to depose my colleagues, my friends, even my deceased grandmother's estate attorney. Meanwhile, Catherine's investigator, a former FBI agent named Tom Morrison, dug into Brian's finances. What he found was staggering. "Your husband has been busy," Tom said, spreading documents across Catherine's conference table. "Very busy doing things that could end his career." The embezzlement came first. $300,000 siphoned from his firm's client trust accounts over 2 years. Small amounts carefully timed, always replaced before audits. But Tom found the pattern. "He's been robbing Peter to pay Paul," Tom explained, taking from one client's settlement to cover another's, juggling money to hide the deficit. But that wasn't the biggest shock. Tom had discovered Brian never actually passed the Massachusetts bar exam. He'd failed 3 times, then somehow started practicing anyway. His father pulled strings, Tom said. Got him a provisional license that was never properly converted. Brian Thompson has been practicing law illegally for 3 years. Mark, Brian's partner, had suspected something was wrong but was being blackmailed into silence. Brian had photos of Mark at a gentleman's club, threatened to send them to Mark's wife Jessica if he exposed the bar exam issue. "Your husband is a piece of work," Tom said. "This goes beyond divorce. This is criminal." The affair with Ashley went deeper too. She was pregnant 4 months along, and Brian had been promising to marry her as soon as the divorce was final. Text messages Tom retrieved showed Brian telling Ashley about the inheritance, promising they'd start fresh with Olive's millions. "We'll be set for life, baby," one text read. "Just need to get through this divorce. Play your part at the firm, and we'll be in the Cayman Islands by Christmas." Ashley had been gathering information from Brian's work computer, sending him confidential details about the firm's finances, helping him cover his tracks. Catherine compiled everything into a comprehensive file. But the masterpiece was Margaret's planning. The inheritance wasn't just protected, it was bulletproof. 5 years before her death, Margaret had created an irrevocable trust with me as sole beneficiary, specifically excluding any current or future spouses from claims. "Your grandmother was brilliant," Catherine said, reading the trust documents. "There's language here I've never seen, provisions that would make it impossible for anyone to touch this money except you." Then Catherine found the prenuptial agreement. Brian had signed it the night of his bachelor party, drunk at the Four Seasons, surrounded by his groomsmen who witnessed it. He'd been showing off, saying he didn't need Olive's money, he'd make his own fortune. The prenup was ironclad, signed, witnessed, notarized. Brian had no claim to anything I'd earned or inherited. I compiled everything into one manila envelope. Every document, every photo, every text message, every piece of evidence that showed who Brian really was. The man who'd stood at our wedding altar promising to honor and cherish me had been a fraud from the beginning. But the real revelation was my grandmother's final letter found in her safety deposit box, dated a month before she died. "My dearest Olive," it read, "I've watched your marriage deteriorate and your spirit dim. I've seen Brian's true nature, recognized it from men I've known in my lifetime. The money I'm leaving you is protected, but more importantly, I hope it gives you the courage to protect yourself. Never let anyone make you small. You are my legacy, not the money. Stand tall, fight back, and remember the best revenge is a life well lived. All my love, Grandmother Margaret." The day of the final hearing arrived, gray and drizzling, fitting weather for the end of a marriage. The courthouse was packed, word having spread through Boston's legal community about Brian's potential disbarment. I wore my best black suit, the one I'd bought with my first bonus, the one that made me feel powerful. Brian sat with his legal team, 3 lawyers in $1,000 suits, confident despite everything. He still believed he could talk his way out, charm his way through the same skills that had fooled me for years. Ashley sat in the gallery, her pregnancy showing under a conservative dress, playing the victim. David Sherman opened aggressively. "Your Honor, we're here because Mrs. Thompson has systematically hidden assets from this marriage, including a $15 million inheritance she's attempted to shield through fraudulent trust structures." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. "My client," Sherman continued, "sacrificed his career trajectory to support his wife's ambitious climb in finance. While she worked 80-hour weeks, Brian maintained their home, their social connections, their entire life infrastructure. Now, as his reward for this sacrifice, she attempts to leave him with nothing." Brian took the stand first, and his performance was Oscar-worthy. His voice cracked, talking about supporting me through long nights, bringing me dinner at the office, attending corporate events, where he was introduced as Olive's husband, as if that was some great humiliation. "I encouraged her every step," Brian said, actual tears forming. "When she got promoted, I celebrated. When she worked weekends, I understood. I put my own career aspirations aside because I believed we were building something together." The lies flowed like water. He claimed he'd done all the housework, managed our social calendar, handled our daily life, while I obsessed over portfolios and profits. "I became invisible in my own marriage," he said, looking directly at me. "She stopped seeing me as a partner and started seeing me as an expense." Sherman moved to the inheritance. "Mr. Thompson, were you aware of your wife's grandmother's estate?" Brian sat straighter. "Margaret and I were close," he lied. "She often said she wanted to take care of both of us, that I was like a grandson to her." "And the $15 million, Sherman prompted. Brian's eyes gleamed. "Hidden from discovery, Your Honor. My wife has structured it to cut me out despite Massachusetts law requiring equitable distribution. That money came during our marriage. Half is rightfully mine." His smugness was nauseating. When Sherman asked about my career success, Brian actually said, "Behind every successful woman is a supportive man who sacrificed his own dreams." The gallery murmured. Some people actually looked sympathetic. Judge Patricia Harrison, a 70-year-old former corporate lawyer, watched everything with sharp eyes. When Sherman finished, she turned to Catherine. "Does the respondent wish to cross-examine?" Catherine stood slowly. "Just a few questions, Your Honor. Mr. Thompson, you say you sacrificed your career for your wife's success. Can you provide specific examples of opportunities you declined?" Brian fumbled, mentioned vague networking events, potential clients he didn't pursue. Catherine's smile was razor-sharp. "And these sacrifices, they're documented somewhere. Emails declining opportunities, letters turning down job offers." "It wasn't that formal," Brian stammered. "It was understood between us." Catherine nodded. "Understood. Like your bar examination results were understood." Sherman objected immediately, but the damage was done. Brian's color drained as Catherine continued. "You testified you were close with Margaret Sullivan. How many times did you visit her during her final illness?" Brian couldn't answer because the answer was 0. Not once had he visited my dying grandmother. Catherine moved through his lies methodically, each question revealing another deception, but she saved the best for last. "Mr. Thompson, you claim my client hid assets. Are you aware of any assets you might have hidden? Perhaps certain firm accounts?" Brian's lawyer objected frantically, but Judge Harrison overruled. The courtroom held its breath. It was my turn to testify. I walked to the witness stand carrying my briefcase, feeling Brian's eyes boring into me. Sherman attacked immediately. "Mrs. Thompson, isn't it true you've transferred significant assets offshore to avoid division?" "No," I answered simply. "Everything I own is documented and declared." Sherman pulled out bank statements, pointed to large transfers. "Then explain these movements of money, these suspicious patterns." I remained calm, explained each transfer, each investment, each decision with the precision of someone who'd spent a decade in finance. Sherman grew frustrated, his questions more aggressive. "You expect us to believe you didn't hide your grandmother's inheritance?" "I didn't hide anything," I said. "The inheritance is in a trust created 5 years before her death. I couldn't hide something that was never in my control to begin with." "Convenient," Sherman sneered. "A trust that just happens to exclude your husband." I met his gaze steadily. "Not convenient. Prescient. My grandmother was an intelligent woman who protected her legacy." Sherman's next attack was personal. "You prioritized your career over your marriage. You worked constantly neglected, your husband drove him to seek comfort elsewhere." The accusation about Brian's affair was barely veiled. I didn't take the bait. "I worked hard to build our life. Every promotion, every bonus went to our joint accounts, our joint expenses. I supported Brian through his professional struggles without complaint." "Professional struggles?" Sherman pounced. "Are you suggesting Mr. Thompson wasn't successful?" This was it, the moment. I stood, picked up my briefcase. "Your Honor, may I approach?" Judge Harrison nodded. Sherman objected, but she silenced him with a look. I pulled out the manila envelope, thick with truth, heavy with consequences. "Your Honor, this contains documents relevant to Mr. Thompson's claims and credibility." Brian's face went pale as I handed the envelope to the judge. His hands gripped the defense table as she opened it, began reading. The courtroom was silent except for the rustle of papers. Judge Harrison's expression changed from neutral to shocked to furious as she read. She looked up at Brian, then at his lawyers, then back at the documents. "Counselors in my chambers, now." The recess lasted 2 hours. When we returned, Judge Harrison's face was granite. Brian's lawyers looked defeated, Sherman actually loosening his tie in distress. Brian himself seemed to have aged years, his confidence evaporated. "I've reviewed the documents provided by Mrs. Thompson," Judge Harrison began. "Mr. Thompson, stand." Brian rose unsteadily. "These documents include a prenuptial agreement signed and notarized waiving rights to inherited assets." Brian's lawyer tried to object. "My client was intoxicated," but Judge Harrison cut him off. "Your client is a lawyer who should understand the binding nature of contracts, intoxicated or not." She continued reading. "The inheritance in question is held in an irrevocable trust established in 2019, 5 years before Margaret Sullivan's death. The trust specifically excludes spousal claims. Mr. Thompson has no legal standing to these funds." But she wasn't done. "More concerning are documents suggesting Mr. Thompson has been practicing law without a valid license." The courtroom erupted. Reporters started typing furiously on phones. Brian's parents, who'd been sitting behind him, stood and left. "Evidence of embezzlement from Thompson Mitchell and Associates client accounts totaling $300,000. Judge Harrison's voice grew colder with each revelation. "Forged signatures on settlement documents. Blackmail of a partner to hide these crimes." She looked directly at Brian. "Mr. Thompson, you've perpetrated a fraud upon this court, your firm, your clients, and your wife. You've committed perjury in your testimony today. Security, please ensure Mr. Thompson doesn't leave." 2 court officers moved to stand behind Brian. His legs gave out and he collapsed into his chair. Ashley in the gallery was crying, whether for Brian or herself wasn't clear. "The evidence also shows Mr. Thompson has been conducting an extramarital affair while simultaneously claiming abandonment by his wife," the judge continued. "Text messages indicate he planned to use any divorce settlement to flee the country with his pregnant girlfriend." Judge Harrison turned to the financial records. "Far from hiding assets, Mrs. Thompson's records show she's been the sole financial support of this marriage for 3 years. She's paid all marital debts, household expenses, and even covered Mr. Thompson's personal spending while he siphoned money from his firm. Furthermore," she said, holding up Tom's forensic accounting report, "Mr. Thompson owes his wife $200,000 in funds he removed from joint accounts without authorization, funds that were her earnings alone." The judge's ruling was swift and merciless. Divorce granted on grounds of adultery and cruel and abusive treatment. Mr. Thompson receives no alimony, no asset division, and no claim to the inheritance. He is ordered to repay Mrs. Thompson $200,000 within 90 days. Additionally, Judge Harrison continued, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney for Criminal Prosecution and to the Board of Bar Overseers for immediate investigation. Mr. Thompson, you are remanded for contempt of court and suspicion of multiple felonies. Brian tried to speak, but no words came. The court officers handcuffed him as his lawyers abandoned him, Sherman literally backing away as if Brian's failure was contagious. Olive, Brian called out as they led him away. Olive, please. I didn't turn around. There was nothing left to say. The man I'd married never existed, just a performance, a long con that had finally collapsed. As they took him out, Ashley approached me. I didn't know, she whispered, her hand on her pregnant belly. He told me you were separated, that you knew about us, that you didn't care. He promised me everything, said the money would be ours. I looked at this young woman barely out of school, pregnant with my husband's child, and felt only pity. He lied to both of us, I said. But you participated in stealing from the firm. You should get a lawyer. Ashley nodded, tears streaming. He said he loved me, she said plaintively. He said I was special. You were, I replied, specially positioned to help him commit crimes. Brian doesn't love anyone but himself. It wasn't cruel, just true. Ashley would learn what I'd learned, that Brian's charm was camouflage for a predator. Catherine found me outside the courthouse. That was beautiful, she said. Your grandmother would be proud. She was right. Margaret had protected me even after death, seen what I couldn't, prepared for what she knew would come. What happens to Brian now? I asked. Catherine's smile was grim. Disbarment for sure. Prison for 3 to 5 years if convicted of embezzlement. The firm will sue him civilly. He's finished. The rain had stopped. An afternoon sun broke through the clouds. Boston looked clean-washed, new. I felt the same way, like years of accumulated grime had been power-washed from my life. My phone buzzed with messages from friends who'd heard from colleagues, from people I hadn't spoken to in years, offering support. But I only cared about one message, a voicemail from Mark. Olive, I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. Thank you for exposing him. Jessica and I want you to know you have friends. Real ones. When you're ready. 6 months have passed since that day in court. The divorce was finalized quickly after Brian's arrest. He pled guilty to embezzlement, got 3 years in minimum security. His parents moved to Florida, unable to face the shame in Boston society. The family name, once golden in legal circles, became shorthand for scandal. Ashley had the baby, a boy she named Daniel. Brian hasn't seen him, hasn't even asked. She's raising him alone, working as a paralegal at a different firm, one that actually verified her supervising attorney's credentials. We ran into each other at a coffee shop last month. She thanked me again for the truth, said it saved her from wasting years on a fantasy. I was promoted to senior portfolio director at a new firm, Meridian Investments. My reputation survived the scandal intact, actually enhanced by how I'd handled everything. Clients appreciated someone who could manage crisis with precision and dignity. My income doubled, but money feels different now, less like validation and more like tool. The house Brian and I shared sold quickly. I bought my grandmother's Beacon Hill townhouse from the estate, spent months renovating it to its former glory. Every room holds memories of her wisdom, her strength. The study where she warned me about Brian is now my home office, and I swear sometimes I can smell her perfume. Margaret's Foundation for Financial Literacy launched 3 months ago. We provide free workshops for women on financial independence, investment strategies, and recognizing financial abuse in relationships. The first workshop had 20 attendees. The last one had 200. Women share their stories, learn to protect themselves, build their own empires. Through the foundation, I met James, Dr. James Martinez, a pediatric surgeon who attended to support his sister after her divorce. He's nothing like Brian. Quiet where Brian was loud, humble where Brian was arrogant. Our first date was coffee and a walk through the common, talking about everything except my very public divorce. James doesn't care about my money. He has his own earned through midnight surgeries saving children's lives. He celebrates my successes without feeling diminished. When I closed a $50 million deal last month, he brought champagne to my office, toasted me in front of my entire team, then went back to his hospital for rounds. We're taking it slow. Trust once shattered rebuilds carefully like broken bones that need time to properly heal. But there's something real there, something based on respect and genuine admiration rather than performance and manipulation. Brian wrote me a letter from prison. I didn't open it. Catherine did summarized it as self-pitying garbage blaming everyone else. He apparently claims I orchestrated everything, that I entrapped him, that I destroyed his life. The delusion continues even behind bars. Mark's firm recovered from the scandal. He sent me a crystal paperweight engraved with "Truth sets us free" and a note thanking me for having the courage he lacked. He and Jessica invited me to dinner. We're slowly building a friendship based on honesty rather than the facade of our previous social circle. The prenuptial agreement Brian signed became something of a legend in Boston legal circles. Lawyers use it in continuing education seminars as an example of ironclad protection. The partner who notarized it that drunken night still practices, tells the story at bar association meetings. "Always read what you sign," he says, "especially when you're drunk and showing off." I visit my grandmother's grave every Sunday. Bring fresh flowers, tell her about my week. The headstone is simple granite with just her name and dates, but the epitaph says everything: she built her own empire. Sometimes I find other flowers there from women who attended our workshops, thanking her posthumously for the wisdom she passed down. Last week I found a letter in her safety deposit box I'd missed before. Dated just days before her stroke, it was addressed to me but meant for reading after the divorce she knew was coming. "My dearest Olive," it began. "If you're reading this, you've discovered the truth and found your freedom. I knew from your wedding day what Brian saw, how he looked at my success with hungry eyes, rather than admiration. I prepared everything to protect you, but you had to see it yourself, had to choose your own liberation. The money I left you isn't about wealth. It's about power, the power to choose your own path without fear or dependence. Use it wisely, but more importantly, use it to help other women find their strength. We rise by lifting others. I'm proud of you not for the success you've achieved, but for the woman you've become despite the man who tried to diminish you. Remember, the best revenge isn't anger or bitterness. It's living so well that those who hurt you become footnotes in your larger story. Love always, Grandmother Margaret." Standing at her grave, I understood that the real inheritance wasn't the 15 million. It was the knowledge that I could survive betrayal, rebuild after destruction, and emerge stronger. The money was just a tool. The true gift was learning my own worth couldn't be determined by anyone else's valuation. My story could have ended with bitterness, with Brian's betrayal defining my future relationships and choices. Instead, it became a beginning. Every woman who walks into our workshop carrying the weight of financial abuse or manipulation sees that survival is possible, that there's life after betrayal, that sometimes the person who tries to break you actually sets you free. Brian thought he was taking half my millions. What he never understood was that my true wealth was never measured in dollars. It was measured in the strength my grandmother saw in me before I saw it myself, in the courage to stand up in that courtroom with evidence of truth, in the wisdom to know that someone else's failure to value you doesn't diminish your worth. The envelope I handed that judge contained more than documents. It contained my Declaration of Independence, my refusal to be diminished, my proof that I was never the small, controllable woman Brian tried to create. He wanted half of everything. In the end, he got exactly what he deserved. Nothing. The best revenge, truly, is a life well lived. My grandmother knew it. Now I live it every single day. And Brian, he's just a cautionary tale I tell at workshops, a reminder that wolves sometimes wear designer suits and wedding rings, but they're still wolves. Looking back, I'm almost grateful for the pain. It taught me to trust my instincts, to value my independence, to recognize that real love doesn't diminish you to feel bigger itself. Real love celebrates your victories, as its own supports your growth without feeling threatened, stands beside you as an equal partner, not above you as a false superior. That courtroom moment when I handed over that envelope, when Brian's empire of lies collapsed, wasn't just victory, it was transformation. I walked in as a woman fighting for divorce. I walked out as a woman who'd reclaimed her power. The money was protected, yes, but more importantly, so was my spirit. My grandmother always said the best investment you can make is in yourself. She was right about that, like she was right about everything else, including Brian, especially Brian. What would you have done in my situation? Have you ever had someone try to take credit for your success or claim ownership of your achievements? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories of triumph over betrayal. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that they're stronger than they know, that financial independence is possible, and that sometimes the best chapter of your life begins when someone else writes themselves out of your story. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember, your worth isn't determined by anyone else's inability to see it. Stay strong, stay smart, and most importantly, stay true to yourself.